What if I told you Brazil's first national hero wasn't a king, a warrior, or a general? He was a poor dentist who was hanged, dismembered, and scattered across the land. They tried to erase him, but they ended up writing his name into history, in blood. This isn't just a story about death. It's about how one man's silence shook an empire, and how his broken body built a nation. April 1792. There it stood, a head mounted on a spear. The blood hadn't even dried. People passed by in silence. Some looked away. Others stared too long. But no one ever forgot what they saw. Arms stretched out on roadside poles, pinned like trophies. Legs displayed in town centers, left to rot where children once played. No signs, no declarations, just fragments of a man, left out like evidence of an invisible war. And yet, this wasn't madness. It was design. Every limb chosen, every place selected. A calculated display of power, the kind that doesn't warn, it dares. The man behind those pieces? Joaquim José de Silva Xavier. To the world, Tiradentes, the tooth puller. He had no title, no rank, just one idea. Freedom. For that idea, he was torn apart, not in shadows, but under the sun, in front of everyone. They wanted fear. What they got was fire. They thought they'd ended something. In truth, they had just awakened it. But how does a man, with no army, no wealth, and no name, become the empire's greatest threat? In smoky corners and backroom whispers, rebellion wasn't being imagined. It was being planned. Before his body was displayed, before the rope, before the axe, there was a dream. The year was 1788. The colony was boiling, not with fire, but with frustration. Gold was flowing, just not to the people. The royal fifth, 1/5 of all mined wealth, stripped away for the crown. Families broke, towns starved, generations sank into debt. And from that suffocation rose a man, not a soldier, not a scholar, just a struggling tradesman, with borrowed clothes and a tired soul. He pulled teeth to survive. But now, he started pulling people toward something greater. While the educated conspired in Latin, he preached revolution in the streets. He didn't quote books. He spoke truths. And people listened. His fire wasn't learned. It was lived. In taverns dimly lit, among spilled drinks and clenched fists, a plan began to take shape. Not a riot, a revolution. He wasn't just speaking anymore. He was recruiting. The man who once numbed pain now became the cause of it, for the crown. But behind the cheers, behind the loyalty, one of their own was about to strike from within. His name was Silverio dos Reis. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a spy. He was one of them, a fellow conspirator. But he was drowning in debt and saw only one way out. On March 15th, 1789, he walked into the governor's office and handed them everything. Names, dates, the entire conspiracy. The dream hadn't died yet, but now it had been marked for death. Forget swords, forget armies. Sometimes one traitor with a loose tongue is all it takes to collapse a revolution. He kept speaking, standing in street corners, sparking hearts. He believed people were waking up. What he didn't know was that the night had already betrayed him. March 1789. The betrayal was done. Silverio dos Reis hadn't just sold names. He'd sold a dream. And the crown wasted no time. Minas was swept by arrests, like a sudden flood. Revolutionaries who once whispered freedom, now whispered prayers from behind bars. But one voice was still out there, still burning. Tiradentes, unaware, still in Rio, still carrying fire in his voice. While the movement bled behind him, he stood in plain sight, preaching to ghosts. The dream he had built had now become a noose tightening around his own neck. Then came the knock. In a quiet merchant's house, with only a candle lit, they came for him. No chaos, no resistance, no last words, just a decision, already made. He was taken to the fortress of Calabuco, a place where silence echoed louder than screams, where light faded, long before hope ever did. This was not a battlefield. It was a cage built for minds. And now, the loudest voice in Brazil was locked in a box of stone. No more chants. No more speeches. Just iron. And waiting. The man who once carried fire now sat surrounded by cold. They had his body, his voice. But could they break his will? They gave him 3 years to shatter. All he gave them back was the truth. The walls didn't break him. The silence didn't crush him. So they turned to something worse. Time. Not days. Not weeks. 3 years. Inside the fortress, time became a weapon. Interrogations. Cross-examinations. Psychological games, meant to peel him apart. Again and again, they asked him for names. They offered mercy, deals, even life, if he'd just betray his brothers. But Tiradentes never blinked. While others minimized their roles, while some pointed fingers, he raised his own hand and said, "It was me. I led it. No one else. Not to escape, not to manipulate, but to protect." Because he knew, if one man bore the weight, the others might walk free. It wasn't strategy. It was sacrifice. When pain couldn't break him, his loyalty became louder than torture. But if he thought death was the end of it, he hadn't seen what they were planning next. The court delivered its sentence. The others spared. Some exiled. Some imprisoned. But only one name was marked for death. Not because he was guilty, but because he refused to be silent. The crown didn't just want justice. It wanted a message. And that message was to be written in his blood. This wasn't justice. This was a performance, crafted to haunt the soul of a nation. April 21st, 1792. The crowd had gathered. Some came to witness history. Most came to watch a man turned into a warning. The gallows stood tall. The rope swayed in silence. And beneath it, Tiradentes, a white tunic draped over his worn frame, a rope tied tight around his neck. But no tremble, no tears, only dignity. There was no apology, no begging for mercy, not a single word of regret, only a prayer. For Brazil, for freedom, and, yes, even for his executioners. He whispered, "May God forgive them, they do not know what they do." Then silence, heavy, immovable, and then, the drop. His body jerked, and the voice that once ignited hearts went still. Death had arrived, but it came quietly, and that silence was only the beginning, because the real punishment was what they did after the hanging. He was gone, but the rope wasn't enough. The empire wanted more, not just death, destruction. His body was removed from the gallows and delivered to the butchers, piece by piece. They started with the head, then the arms, then the legs, until the man was no longer a man, just fragments. Each part was assigned a destination, like cursed mail, sent to scar the land. The head was placed on a spear in Vila Rica, where the rebellion had first taken shape. The arms were nailed along the roads, so travelers would never forget who ruled them. The legs were displayed in mining towns, left to rot in silence, beneath the eyes of the same workers he once inspired. But they weren't done. They destroyed his house, salted the ground, so nothing would ever grow there again. His bloodline, declared infamous, his descendants were stripped of all rights, branded with his name, marked as traitors, for generations yet unborn. His punishment didn't end with death. It became his legacy. But the crown miscalculated something vital. Sometimes pain buries memory, and sometimes it makes it immortal. They wanted to erase him, but instead, they made him a legend. People began to whisper. They spoke of his calm before death, of prayers that echoed like prophecy, of miracles, of courage. They said his blood had touched the soil, and that one day, Brazil would bloom from it. They tried to wipe him from memory. Instead, they made him unforgettable. The body was gone. The house, reduced to rubble. His name, cursed by law. His family, erased from society. But still, he wouldn't disappear. Something began to stir. Not in protest. Not in rebellion. In silence. People began to pray. Not to him, but through him. Clandestine whispers in churches. Catholics lighting candles. In the dark corners of chapels. asking not for gold, but for freedom. His blood, they said, had soaked the land, not as a stain, as a blessing. Relics touched by him were passed in secret, like sacred treasures, wrapped in cloth and fear. And his story began to grow, from mouth to ear, from whispers to songs, from poems to pages in hidden books. The man who died nameless in official records now lived in the legends of the people. He had become more than flesh. He had become myth. And when the time finally came, when Brazil stood ready to break its chains, they didn't forget who bled first. Brazil's independence had many minds behind it, but only one face it could wear with pride. 1822. The empire began to crack. Voices grew louder. Chains grew weaker. And at last, Brazil broke free. No longer ruled by distant hands. No longer silenced by foreign crowns. But when it came time to define who they were, they looked back. Not at generals. Not at politicians. Not even at kings. They looked at Tiradentes, the man they once hanged, quartered, scattered across cities like a curse, had now become a blessing. He wasn't remembered for titles, or for power, or for wealth. He was remembered for choosing death over betrayal. And so, Brazil chose him. April 21st, the day he died, was declared a national holiday, not to mourn, but to celebrate conviction. He was no longer just the tooth puller, no longer a failed soldier, no longer a forgotten prisoner. He was the first face of freedom, the first hero of a nation finally born. What was once punishment became identity, and though his body was lost, Tiradentes still walks. In every voice that dares to dream of freedom,